Well, hello everybody. Welcome to P.B.M. Money. Today, I want to go down memory lane. But the purpose of it is, I want to show you how much things have changed in the last 30 years in buying real estate. Now, back in the day, I was very active in the real estate game. At the height, I had bought an 18-unit apartment building. In total, I had about 34 or 35 units. I was very good at buying property with no money or very little money down. I was good at making the deal, putting the deal together, using private financing, loan assumptions, all of those creative ways to buy real estate I was pretty good at. The problem with that is I had a lot of debt. I was cash poor. Okay, the cash flow was good, but because of the type of properties that I bought, they were in constant need of repair, and I tried to put very little in it. In my mind, I was thinking when I get this thing paid off, I can go back in and rehab. That's the problem of growing too fast. You are underfunded, and that's what happened. And it eventually bled me dry, and I got out of it. I didn't like the business, didn't want to do it, hated it. I was out for many, many years. Then not too long ago, I bought a little rental house for the ministry, and this time I did it differently. I made sure I had plenty of money in the bank. I made sure I put a good amount down, and I made sure that the property was in a decent area and in really good shape. Much different. So, as I go through the process, and we are now in the process of buying a second house, our second house in 3 years, I believe. And I don't, until we buy our duplex, I'm not going to buy another one. Well, not willingly anyway. But in going through the process, there's been some things I've learned and how the market has changed. One of them is the down payment. You know, back in the day, there was two ways of getting in with less than 20%, and that was VA or FHA loans, period. End of conversation. It was 20% down, and it didn't matter if it was rental or residential. 1 unit, 2 unit, 20 units, 20% down. Now, that was a good thing, and that helped the banks. However, what happened around in the 80s was late 70s, early 80s, people started figuring out that the VA and FHA loans were assumable, and so were some of the loans made by banks and savings and loans. You could assume those loans. Well, that turned out to be a minefield for banks and savings and loans, because you had people assuming loans that in no possible way would they qualify for a bank loan. So now you had all of these people out there owning these properties that had no business owning them. It was very treacherous for the banks, and very beneficial for buyers and sellers, but the banks were on the hook. Second thing I noticed was state programs. And the first-time home buyer. Now, as I said, I owned a lot of real estate, but I haven't owned any for a long time. When I went to buy the little house for the ministry, I qualified as first-time home buyer, because if you don't own a home, or you haven't owned a home, and I think it was 5 years. 5 years, you qualify as first-time home buyer. What does that qualify you for? A grant. And there are different programs out there. The state that I'm in was a $6,000 grant. And you had to take a little class online to make sure you understood about real estate. You had to take some tests and pass it. And if you did that, and it probably took me a total of an hour, then they said, here's $6,000, use this at closing. Wow. So we did that, plus I put how much did I put down? I put down about 4 or 5%. plus the 10 or 11% from them. So at total I had about 15% into this property. And now another thing that I noticed was back in the day, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they were around and they were still buying loans. But in this area anyway, the majority of the banks liked to keep their loans in-house because they made the money on the interest. Well, when the market started getting a little iffy because of the loan assumptions, because of the roaring 80s, because things were going so breakneck, the banks decided that they would forego the interest on the loans and sell the loans to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, that did a couple of things in this area anyway. That means that the federal government was going to take on the responsibility for the debt. That made the bankers much more liberal in making the loans. You're much more liberal, you're much more willing to make a loan if you're not going to lose any money on it. And in this area, the banks are very conservative. The guidelines that came out from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were much more liberal as far as documentation was going. So these banks, if they were going to keep the loans in-house, they were very conservative. But when they decided they were going to sell them to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, all of a sudden the borderline buyers were getting approved for loans. I remember one time I went in, I was just checking the information on a loan to buy a condo. And I told the loan officer why I was there, and he said, go in here. And he said, I'm going to have somebody come in there and talk to you. He sat down, and in 10 minutes he had me sign about 50 sheets of paper. And he said, okay, we'll be in touch in 30 days. I bought a house, I bought a condo, and I didn't even intend to. Really, it was that liberal. So Fannie and Freddie, this time, when I went to buy these two little homes, everybody now wants to sell their houses or their house loans to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They don't want the interest from the loans. They'll just sell them to the government, and the way the banks are making the money is they get a monthly service fee for taking care of the loan locally and not making the federal government do that. But because of the structure of this, and because the banks are trying to figure out ways to make money and sell the loans to Fannie and Freddie, one of the things from 30 years ago is making a comeback, and that's points on a loan. And a point on a loan is X amount of dollars. For every X amount of dollar you put down, they're going to lower your interest rate on your loan X amount. You know, so as an example, if you were paying 2 points, let's say 2 points equals $1,000. That's 2% of the loan, $1,000, okay? If you put down $1,000, they would knock your interest rate down 0.5 point. So what the banks are doing now is saying, okay, we're going to turn over all the interest on the loan to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but they were getting the interest right up front at closing. So the bank is getting the monthly service fee, plus they're getting 1 or 2% points on the loan, and that's going to become a big thing. Because if Fannie and Freddie figure that out and they decide that they need X amount on each loan, that's going to push loan rates up. So anyway, it appears now that Fannie and Freddie have become just the automatic knee-jerk reaction to every residential loan being made by banks today. They're packaging them and selling them to Fannie and Freddie, and they're not keeping any in-house. The only things that I can see that they're keeping in-house are subdivision deals, lot deals, and commercial properties. And I don't know much about any of that to speak to that. Another thing that I have noticed has changed is computers. Good heavens, back in the day, you would go in and get your paperwork, and you'd have to spend an hour sitting at a loan officer's desk going over all the paperwork, getting all your income tax documentation, your employment verification. It was a nightmare, and throughout the process, if they needed anything else, you had to set another appointment, take time off work, go into the bank, jump through all their silly little hoops, and then had to take time off for closing. It was a major process. Okay, these last two times that I have bought these little houses, they're sending me documents at 1 in the morning, so they're there when I get up in the morning and check my email. And if they need anything signed, they use a software program called DocuSign, and they send the documents. They highlight where they want you to sign. You just click to it and hit a button, and boom, you've signed it. You can sign a half a dozen documents in 30 seconds. Saves a lot of time, a lot of leg power, and it gives you more time to go over the documents also. Now, the last thing that I have noticed is the appraisal process. Back in the day, the appraisal always came in at whatever the selling price was, or the purchase price. And I agree with that. If you and I come to an agreement that a house is worth X amount of dollars, then that ought to be the selling price. Why should the fact that there's 5 other comps in the neighborhood that are $2,000 less, why should that affect our deal? I'm not in a deal with the other 5 or 7 people. I'm in a deal with you. I know this to be a fact because the first little house that we bought, the appraisal came in $2,000 less. Okay? $2,000 less than what we had agreed to. Now, at that point, the seller has the right to walk away, and I could have lost that deal from an appraiser. I don't think that's right. I think the appraiser should be there to authenticate that the real estate is actually there, there's actually that address, it's actually standing, and it's actually in decent shape, or it actually needs some work. That should be his function, not determining what a buyer and a seller agree on as the price. Just my opinion. But if you ask any broker, real estate broker, what the definition of getting their commission is, it's putting a willing buyer and a willing seller together. If that deal had fallen apart, the realtor would have lost his money, I would have lost the deal, and that guy would have lost the sale. All because of an appraisal. That, by the way, is not scientific, it is subjective. That's why there are 3 different types of appraisal processes that can be used. Well, I have issues. I mean, I didn't lose anything on that deal, but the guy that sold me the property had to come down $2,000 on his price because I wasn't paying another. I was not negotiating that. To me, the deal was done. He's either going to suck up the $2,000 or I'm walking away. I mean, it worked to my advantage, granted, but I still don't believe it's right. He should have gotten his $2,000. It's just my opinion. Something wrong with the system, I think. But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. You guys have a great day, a great week, and happy investing.